Hi, welcome to Speaking of Mysteries. I'm Bruce Southworth, a mystery reviewer for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and my guest today is Sara Paretsky, who's the author of the groundbreaking and extremely popular V.I. Warshawski series. The series started in 1982 with Indemnity Only and is now at its 10th book, Total Recall, issued just this year, 2001, from Delacorte. Sara is also the founder and first president of Sisters in Crime, and we'll talk more about that. Several non-series books as well, Windy City Blues, which is a book of short stories featuring V.I. Warshawski, and a non-series book called Ghost Country, which we'll also talk about. She's received numerous awards. Ms. Magazine named her a Woman of the Year in 1987. She's won the Silver Dagger Award from the British Crime Writers Association for Bloodshot in 1988, the Marlowe Award from the German Crime Writers Association for Guardian Angel in 1993, the Mark Twain Award for Distinguished Contribution to Midwest Literature in 1996, and recently she was a visiting fellow to Wolfson College in Oxford, England, 1997. Welcome. Thanks very much for being here. I appreciate it. Rather than just launching directly into the book, the first book, let's kind of introduce people to the character a little bit. Can you tell me about the origins of V.I. Warshawski? Where did she come from?
I started writing about V.I. This sounds so corny, but I started on New Year's Day in 1979. I had wanted for a long time to write a novel just to see if I could. I'd been writing my whole life, but very privately, little things that I did for myself. Mm-hmm. And this was my daydream. I'd write a book and all those things. And finally I thought, 1979, I was 31, I thought, this is it. Either I do this or it goes onto the ash heap of discarded daydreams. I was a marketing manager for an insurance company. So I made a New Year's resolution. It's the only one I've ever made and kept. And I sat down, hungover as I was, and began writing what became the first book, Indemnity Only. But it was a long journey, about a 10-year journey almost, to that day from when I had first read Chandler. Mm-hmm. And always had been a huge reader of crime fiction. But with Chandler, I began seeing that women in the American mystery were either sexually active villains who mm-hmm. tried to use their bodies to make good boys do bad things, or they were helpless victims, or but they were never just problem solvers who could be center stage and mm-hmm. be real human beings at the same time. And it just took me a long time to get to that point where I could really see my way with what I wanted to do.
Was the character herself based in any way on you or friends or acquaintances? Or is she an amalgam of people, or is she made up of whole cloth, so to speak?
When I started the first book in the series, she was really much more drawn from the noir tradition. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, I really was not very confident that I could execute this. So I sat with, I had the Gottschalk manuscript, Robert Godwolf manuscript, mm-hmm. Robert Parker's first book, and The Long Goodbye, and they were open on my lap. And of course, this is 1979. We didn't have computers, and in those days, I wrote by hand and then typed it all. Mm-hmm. And I had them open on my lap, and I'd say, okay, this far into the book, she gets hit over the head. This far into the book, she has a confrontation with the police. And mm-hmm. so it was very much the structure of the novel and a lot of how her affect mm-hmm. was really drawn from the noir tradition. It's only been over the life of the series that she's, I would say, starting with the second book, but really with the third book, Killing Orders, is when I began to see her as a whole person with a distinct history, and to really move her out of that hard-boiled history, the Hammett, Chandler, Ross MacDonald history, and to give her a distinctive voice of her own. Mm.
I understand you took a writing class, or crime fiction writing class, from Stuart Kaminsky?
Yes.
And that was somewhat helpful?
Very helpful. I had started in January of '79 with what became Indemnity Only. I was working for a multinational insurance company, And so the title has a very specific insurance reference. I
Mhm.
decided to set it in insurance because that would minimize how much research I had to worry about.
Right.
And I'd written 60 or 70 pages and thought, I just don't know what I'm doing. It took me 9 months to get that far. And then I saw Stu was teaching a night course at Northwestern University in Chicago, where he used to teach,
Mm-hmm.
called Writing Detective Fiction for Publication. So he was incredibly supportive. He liked the character. He explained to me things I was writing really anachronistic language because I was drawing so heavily from the pulps. And he was also the person who persuaded me to focus on white-collar crime because I was in the business world, and that was something I could bring that was a bit different than the typical detective novel.
Right. Even the latest book, we'll kind of move on to that right now, to Total Recall. VI is still solving white-collar crime in many respects, but I mean, there's so many layers in that book going on. It's absolutely incredible. Maybe you could give us a quick summary of the book, if that's possible. It's just
Well, Total Recall is a book I had wanted to write for some time. Lottie Herschel is V.I. Warshawski's longtime friend and mentor. She's a doctor who's about 20 years older than my detective. She came to London as a child refugee from Central Europe in the days right before the Second World War. And that era was so painful for her in many ways. Her whole family died in the Holocaust. And she just drew a line across that past and has refused to visit it.
Mm-hmm.
She's really been carrying some secrets with her in the intervening decades since the end of the war, and never told VI, never told her oldest friends. There are characters in the ongoing series, Max Lowenthal, who she met in London when they were refugees together, and he followed her to Chicago. They're lovers. There's several things happen in this book. There's the issue of the European insurance companies with the policies that they've refused to pay to beneficiaries whose parents perished in the Holocaust because people can't provide death certificates. And I think they're really going to get away with it. I think they're going to get away with sitting on nobody knows how many tens of millions of dollars in life insurance, just waiting for the last survivors to die. So that issue comes front and center, and at the same time, a man who claims to have recovered memories of surviving a childhood in one of the concentration camps, Terezin in Czech, comes forward and begins stalking Lottie and Max and their circle of friends. And these issues force Lottie to confront this past that she really hoped to escape. So the book, the title, Total Recall, deals with memories that, in the case of this guy who claimed to have recovered memories of his childhood, things that people can't remember and want to, things that they can't forget and want to, and it's kind of the confluence of how the past can really influence and even destroy the present.
It's I think it's fascinating the way you interleaved the recovered memory and then the people who are saying that recovered memory is nothing more than planted memory, and there's another plot going on where a family, a member of a family dies and they try to cash in the insurance, but they find that 10 years before that somebody had already cashed in the policy, and so that's kind of one of the other ongoing, that's the sort of business, I guess, plot that's going on in the whole thing. When you're putting a book together, say like Total Recall, how do you manage in your thinking and in the way you're constructing the book to figure out how you're going to interlace all of those things and so that they're well tied together and coherent?
I work kind of by doing. It's the only way I know how to write. So I'll write things, and if they don't work, then I'll drop them and try another approach. With Total Recall, this is the final book that you see in front of you, is the seventh draft, my seventh attempt to tell the story. I knew what I wanted to do with Lottie, but I didn't know how to integrate it into the story. And that's really how I work along. Tony Hillerman has used the expression of riding to the end of the headlights in the road. And he gets that far and then he has to stop and get the car to catch up with where the end of.
That's an interesting image.
Yeah, and that's very much how I work also. Books have a shape. I see them physically, and each book has a somewhat different shape. It's how you know when you're at the end, when that shape feels complete. But to get this story together, it took me a lot of different doing, a lot of different, and I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to give away what the fundamental secret that Lottie has been carrying.
Yeah, definitely don't want to do that.
To people who haven't read the book. But the most recent previous book to Total Recall was Hard Time, which was published in 1999. And I introduced a priest in there, a character, one of the characters I've liked best of my recent new characters, an old and really curmudgeonly Irish priest in a poor South Side church. And originally with Total Recall, I really wanted to bring him back. So I had a whole side plot on modern day refugees, and that was how I was going to approach Lottie as a long ago refugee. And then I saw I just couldn't make that work. So I had to drop all of that. And then I had a British journalist who was coming over to do reporting on skinheads. And I wrote chapters, and she was a kind of a rival with VI for Morel, VI's current love interest. They had covered, Morel and this woman had covered foreign events long before VI ever met him. And I had to drop all that, and that was such a shame because she was such a good sort of bitchy woman who really brought out the worst in VI.
Perhaps you can bring her back, in subsequent books.
Right, I'm trying to work her into the new one that I've just started work on.
It sounds like she would be a great, great character. I'm curious, you said this is a book that you've been kind of wanting to write for about 10 years. What made now, or when you started writing the book, the appropriate time, do you think?
Some of it, I think, are things that you don't know yourself. You're ready to tell a story that you might not have been strong enough. This book deals with some themes that have always been kind of part of the subtext of my life and that I haven't wanted to think about. And I think I finally was ready to write this book. But some of it was just finding the right story for the story. About 10 years ago, I began wondering why Lottie Herschel, who is the person that VI always turns to when she's been bruised either emotionally or physically, and very often physically, why is she so brusque and even confrontational when VI is at her most needy? And I began thinking about what would make someone behave that way, and I began constructing the backstory, what her history was. And then through the series, through Guardian Angel, which I think was, I can't remember my publications anymore, but I think it was 92. That was the 7th book in the series, and Tunnel Vision, which was the 8th book in the series. With both of them, I tried to tell the story, and I couldn't get to it. And I finally had to say, I'm not ready to write it.
No, it's all come together in a very masterful way, I think, in this book. And as you said, we can't give too much away, because there's interesting stuff, not even that far into the book, that would reveal probably too much. So, before we talk a little bit more about the series in general and other things that you've been working on, let's talk a bit about Sisters in Crime. And I was wondering if you could tell me how you came to, and I'm not sure, I've read different things, whether you were the founder or part of a group of people who were the founders of the group who put it together. So maybe you can give me a little bit of a history of how that came together.
In March of 1986, Hunter College in New York did what was really the first national conference on women in the mystery. And after I was on some public panels there and talking about some of the things that were really troubling women writers at that time, ranging from the sadistic images or the sadism that was being committed against women in books that were winning awards and in movies that were very high profile, to the way that women were often really muscled to the side. I mean, at BoucherCons, the national crime conferences, there would always be a panel on women mystery writers, and that would be kind of like the ladies bless them. And you'd get asked questions like, well, what do you do when your kitty cat walks on your computer and wipes out your text? So we felt very much that we were being treated as second-class citizens. So some of it was, I made some rather outspoken remarks at that conference and began getting a lot of phone calls from women around the country. And some of them were like Terry White in Cleveland, Sue Grafton out in Santa Barbara, who were sort of sharing some of their experiences. Sue was very taken with an issue that was in MWA, the Mystery Writers of America at the time. So I began on the fact that women were not being given awards. So I began polling women and asking if they had enough interest in these issues to try to get together, to form an organization, to try to deal with them. And so in that sense, yes, I was the person who galvanized it. And we had a meeting at the crime conference, the BoucherCon in Baltimore that October. 25 of us came, and that was kind of the core group that then really founded the organization. I would say that probably without the support of Dorothy Salisbury Davis, we might never have gotten off the ground. Dorothy, who's become one of my most beloved friends and has always been a mentor, decided that the things we were talking about were really serious, and she began getting more established writers than we were at that time. People like herself, like Mary Higgins Clark, to agree to pay them $5 that we charged people and sign up and give us some respectability. The biggest issue that I think that we dealt with, and the thing that has made a difference for women in the field, was at that time we ran the numbers. I mean, we did a year's worth of data gathering, and we found that adjusting for the difference in numbers of books published, that a man who wrote a mystery was 7 times more likely to get a review in a national publication than a woman. And it's book reviews that get you into libraries and into bookstores.
Right.
Because if they don't know that you're there, they're not going to bring your book in. So we sort of took that issue head on, and we began a monitoring program, and we let newspapers and publications know we were doing it. And as soon as we did, they started looking at their policies. It wasn't so much that they were saying, yes, let's ignore women, but you know, you look at what's like you, and most of the reviewers were men. They were looking at, so that began to change almost overnight. The other thing that we did, and this was the work of Sharon McCrum, Linda Grant, and Carolyn Hart, was to put together a books in print that we took directly, just everything that women were writing, whether they were part of the organization or not, taking it directly to bookstores and to libraries and saying, look, you know, this is what's out there. And I think we really grew the readership for mysteries. I think the reason that market has just continued to grow in the way that it has is because we created such an awareness of books that, you know, there was a whole group of women readers who wouldn't read mysteries because there just wasn't anything in there they could respond to. When they started seeing books that really spoke to their experience, then they began coming into the mystery bookstores and growing the form.
Well, the organization has also grown considerably, I guess, from that original 25. I read somewhere that there's close to 4,000 members now.
That's right.
Worldwide.
Yeah.
So that's
there's a huge chapter in Melbourne. There's a European chapter. There are Japanese members. And, I'm not actively involved in it anymore. I feel like I'm much better at getting on my horse and galloping around and saying the British are coming than I am in being a sort of administrator. And
Right.
when an organization is established, that's when my disorganization is a handicap.
Do you know, if you're not involved in it that much anymore, it might be a question, but I'm just wondering if you sense that the purpose of the organization as you founded it has somewhat been served. That's not quite the word I want, but you know, there are new issues coming up. It's changed its focus at all, or is it still pretty much on making people aware of women writers, making sure that the reviewers know they're out there and so on? Is it still pretty much that, or has it changed?
I think that what we've found, or the people who are really actively working in it have found, is that there are two different things going on. There are chapters all over the country at the local level, and that's where people really come together and get a sense of support and camaraderie.
Mm-hmm.
And that's much more directed or they seem to serve the needs of people who want to become writers more than for published writers.
Mm-hmm.
At the national kind of organizational level, what we found is that when we stop focusing on the issues, the same issues come back to dog us.
Oh.
So that, and then it becomes hard, because once you've done the work once, it's kind of hard both for you to keep coming back and doing it again, you know, monitoring reviews and that kind of thing. And it's hard to get publications to be attentive, because they feel like we're just a bunch of squeaky wheels and they've heard from us. And, you know, it's like one guy said, "Are you guys still doing feminism? I got over that in the 70s.
Oh my gosh. So, well, the pressure must have to be constantly on then. That's interesting. I would have thought that would have changed to some extent now.
I think in some ways, of course, when you see the wide range of women who are, you know, when I started with VI in 1982, she was essentially the first private eye,
Mm-hmm.
and she was just about the first woman out there playing that kind of central problem-solving role. Marcia Muller had written one Sharon McCone book 5 years previously, and there were a few other things, Amanda Cross and
Mm-hmm.
Lillian, I'm not going to get it right, O'Donnell, with her New York Transit cop. And you know, I can name all those. And then Sue came out a little bit later the same year with her first book, and now I don't even know who all is doing it. And they're wonderful writers, creating
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of characters. Nevada Barr she's not a newcomer anymore, but newcomer from where I started, and just
Mm-hmm.
tons of women out there. So that is never going to change. We're never going to go back to where we were 15 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk quickly. We're kind of running a little short on time, believe it or not. A little bit more about the series in general. I've noticed that most of the books have a very personal connection. They involve a friend or a family member or someone that's close to VI. Is that a way that you kind of enter the book? Or is it?
Yes, I don't do it I don't sit down and think, okay, you know, now who from VI's circle of friends is going to get beat up this time? It's more because it has to be personal for me to feel personal about it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that isn't the best way of saying it, but I can't write by the numbers. I have to really care about the project to write it.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way I care about it is to have characters that I'm really invested in. I've been having a very hard time getting started. I finished Total Recall, my current book that was published in 2001, in January of 2001, and I really haven't been writing, and here we are in November. So it's been a whole year where I really haven't been writing for a variety of personal reasons, and then, like so many people, the September 11th events
Mm-hmm.
really have slowed me down. But I'm starting to have a sense of a character. There's a character who appears very peripherally in the series. He's always referred to just as VI's bread and butter client, and his name is Derek Graham, and he's head of some big unspecified conglomerate that does many things. so that I can always have some branch of his organization involved in something. And his mother lives in a sort of an upmarket retirement home, and she's seeing people wandering around the yard in the night. And so Derek is going to bring VI in. So I needed that character. I needed someone with a personal connection for VI to care enough to even go out and look at this place. I mean, it's a gated community. She doesn't care about places like that. I had to have some reason for her to be out there. And suddenly last week I thought, right, it's Derek's mom. She's 80-something.
That sounds great. Well, I can't believe it, but we have run out of our half hour, so I want to thank you very, very much for taking the time to do the interview, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, it's great to talk to you, Bruce.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.